People of the world, greetings and salutations. I am the Hiraeth gamer, and I felt that it was time that I, too, shared with the world my top 10 favorite games of the decade. "2019 is well behind us at this point, and while I have certainly missed a few critical games, I can't play everything. I do like to think that I've played a substantial amount of games over the past 10 years, and as such, the following list is, to me, the cream of the crops of the previous decade. So, here are the rules. Number 1. It has to be a title that launched between 2010 and 2019. Even if a game has seen tremendous popularity over the past decade, if it launched prior to 2010, it's off the list by default. Number 2. Only one title per series. For example, only one Assassin's Creed game would be allowed. And lastly, number 3, no remakes or remasters. Now, before I get into the list, I want to quickly rattle off a few honorable mentions. These are games that I have enjoyed or still am enjoying tremendously, but for various reasons didn't make the list. Here goes. BioShock Infinite, Borderlands 2, Cuphead, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, Guild Wars 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, Ori and the Blind Forest, Rayman Legends, Rocket League, Rocksmith 2014, and Undertale. I tip my hat to these games, and with that said, let's take a closer look at the Divine 10. And before I start, just a quick warning, there will be spoilers. Coming in at number 10, Portal 2. Puzzle games are an odd breed. Everyone in its genre tries to come up with a new, innovative gameplay mechanic in order to feel unique and fresh. As such, most puzzle games exist for the sole reason of solving puzzles. Its means are the end, if you will. Rarely do you see a puzzle game where the story is the focus rather than the puzzles themselves. Yet that is exactly the case for Portal 2. The puzzle concept of the game is easy, and it would likely create a sense of repetitiveness were it not for the story elements included. Portal does a wonderful job of pushing you onward without it feeling like a must. You naturally want to continue as the story is as exciting as it is funny. From dumb but charming Wheatley, whom you meet early on in the game and who acts as a would-be guide.
I've got an idea, but it is bloody dangerous. Here we go. Ah! Oh, for God's... They told me that if I ever turned this flashlight on, I would die.
To the cynical, dismissive antics of Gladys, and the dry humor of the father of aperture science, Cave Johnson.
It's been a long time. How have you been? I've been really busy being dead. You know, after you murdered me.
You did what?
There is a lively and unique set of characters that shape the story and whom you can't help but love despite their obvious annoyances. Or perhaps it is precisely because of these annoyances. Despite the relative simplicity of the game mechanics, the game does a great job of introducing new elements and obstacles to keep the puzzles, which are at their core all the same, fresh and challenging. Just when you thought you got the hang of it all, a wrench is thrown into the machine, keeping you on your toes. The game nails the comedy aspect of the story, and combined with simple but effective puzzle mechanics, this game is a must-play. You may make a note here, Portal 2 is definitely a triumph.
I'm in space.
I know you are, mate. Yeah, we're both in space. Anyway.
Number 9. Hollow Knight. After a long and boring square-off between Hollow Knight and Ori and the Blind Forest, Hollow Knight ultimately won. Hollow Knight is a gloomy, dreary, somber, sad, and solitary experience, and it is in those seemingly negative qualities that its odd charm lies. Despite its sometimes lush environments, there is an overarching, doom-laden atmosphere pressing down on this beautiful, hand-drawn world. Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania of the highest tier. Combat is tight and often grueling, but it's fair. If you die, that is because you, as a player, failed to perform. Many enemies, bosses in particular, do take some getting used to, and some bosses are so overwhelming and so overwhelmingly imposing that your will to live sinks to the bottom of your feet after your 5th or so attempt. Yet, When you finally do get their patterns down and you do beat them, there's nothing quite like that particular feeling of accomplishment. Aside from combat, there's a hefty dose of platforming present, so quick thinking and even faster fingers are required to get the most out of this game. The game teaches you the ropes slowly through an immersive tutorial, but quickly ramps up the difficulty by making traversal harder and more punishing, forcing you to combine combat with platforming, or even outright making you play the most difficult game of The Floor is Lava you have ever played. I'm looking at you, White Palace, and I'm glaring at you, Path of Pain. Another thing to note is that this game doesn't quite bother to hold your hand. In fact, it is the lack of direction at the start of the game that can throw many people off. In an age where games are constantly making sure you know what to do and where to go, the peculiar radio silence in Hollow Knight is perhaps both a blessing and a curse. You are free to lose yourself in this game without periodic updates about your current status and objective, but if you are truly lost, then you are, well, truly lost. The game is, as stated before, a Metroidvania game, so backtracking and proceeding through new areas by means of newly acquired skills or developments within the game world is part of the game, but at times the way forward can be quite obscure and there is nothing in the game to give you a hint. There is, however, an odd, liberating feeling to this immense freedom. Being lost in this game is by no means a bad thing, for there are plenty of wonderful little things to see if you take the time. And making your way through it all by relying on nothing but your own two hands and your own train of thought makes playing through this game one of the most rewarding experiences out there. Aside from the base game, there is also a superb supply of DLC content, all of which has been released for free. Hollow Knight is the full package and then some. To those with dexterous fingers and a thing for exploring the unknown, this one's definitely for you. Number 8. Life is Strange. A gut-wrenching story, relatable, believable characters, spectacular attention to minor details, and a killer soundtrack make Life is Strange a must-have on this list, despite it being a glorified walking simulator.
That was so fucking cool!
The game puts you in the shoes of a down-to-earth but introvert, aspiring photographer, and you experience the world through her eyes, or should I say, through her camera lens, as she gains the ability to rewind time. Time manipulation has always been a much-loved subject of mine, but it has to be done right, or the whole thing will quickly fall apart. This game, luckily, does a stellar job of finding just the right balance so as to not to go overboard or make it silly. Aside from telling a spectacular story, one of the key things about this game is that its story depends heavily on the choices you make as a player. The game is a master at guilt-tripping you and doesn't shy away from doing just that every step of the way. And no matter how hard you try to help and do the right thing, given your newfound powers, somehow things tend to end up much worse instead of better.
But I had no idea what would happen, and as usual, I messed everything up, and I never want to hurt you. Ever. You have to believe me.
Juggling this newfound power, school life, strange goings-on at school, a frightening vision of the future, and the relationship with your best friend makes for a wild, chaotic, and bubbling cauldron that, despite its many threads, manages to intertwine beautifully into a fantastic, albeit agonizing conclusion. How much are you willing to sacrifice to get what you want? Moving on with number 7, Divinity: Original Sin 2. You take a hefty story, a sprawling, detailed world, turn-based combat that encourages experimentation, and you've got my interest. Divinity: Original Sin 2 is a title where you truly carve your own path. You start out as a glorified prisoner and have to make your escape. The fact that there are no less than 4 ways to escape your predicament shows just how deep the options of this game run. Playing either your own character or one of the preset ones, you meet a bunch of potential team members who will aid you in battle however you prefer. One might say that they are good with a bow and arrow, but if you prefer for them to take up the art of backstabbing, then that is precisely what they will do. You can mold and shape the story however you see fit. Speaking of which, you don't have to take anyone along. If you so desire, you can go at it alone, as the lone wolf you envision yourself to be. You are a sorcerer, an involuntary user of a particular kind of magic that will bring ruin to the world. On top of that, you are God-woken, a being meant for greatness, and so you journey to find out exactly what it means to be God-woken, and if divinity, which is ultimately reserved for you, is something that you desire. This is the overarching story, but everywhere you go, the locations and its inhabitants are so detailed and fleshed out, you often find yourself losing track of the bigger picture, as you find yourself focused so intently on the local problems. Combat in this game is challenging. Especially players who are not too familiar with turn-based combat will likely find themselves struggling with the early hours of the game. Once you start to get the hang of it, however, a whole new world of possibilities start to open up as you find yourself planning your positioning and strategy before the battle even starts, allowing you to make sure you have the upper hand no matter what. Not only is this recommended, the game will at times even applaud you for your scheming ways. Divinity Original Sin 2 is an intricate masterpiece with a steep learning curve that will only really start to shine once it clicks. Number 6. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This was bound to come up, and it's not surprising. The scope and scale of this game is mind-boggling, and I sometimes wonder how this game was even possible back in 2015. You are Geralt, an infamous witcher, that is, monster slayer for hire. You travel from place to place looking for contracts on whatever vile creatures plague the locals, all the while being shunned and despised by those very same locals, for witchers are born of the same magic that spawned the monsters that plague them to begin with.
Talk.
Oi, people! The freak's taken Micah's mind!
And I'll take your tongue if you don't shut up.
This tragic contrast is one I have always appreciated. The main magical thing about this game is that every little thing feels like an actual adventure. A lot of time and effort has gone into the many quests that this game has to offer, and when a side quest feels like a main quest, you know you're doing it right. This is even more impressive if you consider that the world of The Witcher 3 is absolutely colossal. Whether you are in war-torn no man's land, where people's one and only concern is their day-to-day survival, are moving to the bigger cities to catch a glimpse of the more structured city life and the apartheid within its communities, or travel to the cold northern shores of Skellige where you join would-be Vikings in glorious combat, there is something here for everybody. And despite the maps being enormous, you find them to be densely packed with all kinds of activities and points of interest. Combat takes a little bit of getting used to, as the enemies are fairly unforgiving and you can get mauled or overwhelmed easily. Because of this, however, there is a strong satisfaction in defeating an enemy once you get the hang of the dance-like form of combat you employ. Combining potions, which you are required to drink prior to combat, your magical abilities, or signs, and your swordsmanship to take down a towering fiend or an ancient lesson is something that will never grow old. After the main game, where you and your would-be daughter try to deal with the various forces that are out there to either end you or capture you, there is also a substantial amount of DLC content, which offer an additional whopping 20 to 30 hours of gameplay.
Fascinating story. Any chance you're nearing the end?
The Witcher 3 has been king of the RPG spectrum for a long time, and rightfully so. This game has a level of quality, polish, and detail many developers could and should learn from. Halfway point, number 5. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. This might be the pinnacle of the open world game genre of the past decade. A stylish game brimming with adventure, accompanied by a serene, minimalistic score, urges you to explore. For the first time, a Zelda game gets some true verticality to it, and it opens up heaps of possibilities. It's almost ironic that one of the most fun things to do in this game is to simply walk around, looking for stuff to do. You can follow the main story, but you might not feel as inclined to do so as the game doesn't pressure you to. Everything at your own pace, in your own time. And if that means you wish to follow the main story, that's fine. If that means you wish to play with a dog, that is also fine. If you do wish to follow promises, however, you can expect to follow the familiar formula the Zelda games are known for, updated to Breath of the Wild standards. You must go to 4 locations with 4 themes, and you must apply your wit and skills to traverse a dungeon at each of these locations, which climaxes by means of a boss fight. All this so you can then take it to the real villain of the game and show it who's boss. Tale as old as time, or at least as old as 1986. But even these dungeons somehow feel fresh and new, with the added ability to climb and maneuver more freely. This game truly does the word freedom justice. If you can see it, you can go to it, and if it seems to be out of reach, you can climb up to it. And once you're high up and need to get down, you can simply use your paraglider, an item you get early on in the game, to glide down, and simultaneously experience a serene and tranquil moment of bliss as you get an eagle's view of this wonderful and wonderfully vast world, before moving on to pick apples from a tree or something. Again, everything in your own time, at your own pace. Perhaps that is indeed the correct one-word description to describe this game with. Oddly tranquil. Okay, so that's 2 words. Despite the many dangers and key figures pressing you to do something, or Calamity Ganon will destroy us all, I still felt strangely at peace in this world. If you own a Nintendo Switch, or even a Wii U, and you haven't tried this game, you are doing yourself a disservice. Number 4. The Last of Us. I remember the impact The Last of Us had when it launched. There were a few cries that wondered if this was perhaps a bit too much in regards to its gritty and graphic storytelling. Turns out that because of its ruthless nature, it became a story that no one will soon forget. From the opening moments, where sweet little Sarah, whom I already shared a bond with despite knowing her for less than 20 minutes, dies in the most gut-wrenching way, you knew that you were in for a ride that would change you one way or the other.
Sarah! Move your hands, babe. I know, baby, I know. God. Listen to me, I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah.
The voice acting work in this game is, to this day, a benchmark. The chemistry between Joel and Ellie, the main protagonists, is one for the history books. I've never been a fan of having a companion in my games, but Ellie's hard-ass attitude convinced me in a matter of minutes, making me glad to have her. Both start out clawing at each other's throats, and Joel slowly, at just the right pace, opening up to Ellie is done so well that this, in and of its own, is worthy of an Oscar. As the game unfolds, Ellie will often try to tackle mundane subjects or joke about things, making her a beacon of positivity in a world that has all but gone to hell.
I'm whistling.
Oh, good. Something else you can drive me crazy with.
That's awesome.
And during combat, she will occasionally help out by throwing medkits or ammo your way, making her not just a story element, but also a useful partner. Speaking of combat, gameplay-wise, the game does a nice job of giving you a sense of looming dread, where using loud weapons gives you an easier time against the immediate enemies, with the drawback that more enemies will likely show up as they are drawn to the noise. At that, supplies, ammo in particular, are hard enough to come by as it is, sometimes putting you in a perilous situation where you are completely empty despite having to move forward. It doesn't take long before you start to see Joel and Ellie as a father and daughter, and in this unforgiving world you find yourself rooting for them all the way. This is the home stretch, coming in at number 3, God of War. I was late to this party. While I did enjoy God of War 3, I thought it was nothing too spectacular, and I was okay with skipping the next title. I love Greek mythology, but all the eternally angry hacking and slashing was getting a bit stale, so this game passed me by initially. Then I started to see the accolade reign and gave the game a go myself, which is easily one of the best things I have done in recent time. Kratos has simmered down and grown a beard. The location has shifted from famous Greek landmarks to the cold shores of the far north, and the mindless swashbuckling has been replaced with a focus on the bond between Kratos and his son, who he raised under a strict rule. This bond that slowly grows between Kratos and Boy, like a piece of oak, is really quite impressive, and through Kratos' tough love attitude unfolds in a very distinct and interesting way. Kratos is very much a stick in the mud, and that is where other characters you meet come in. Whether it's a kind witch with a foggy past,
Maybe I see more of myself in you than I'm willing to admit. Maybe by helping you, I'll make up for a lifetime of mistakes.
a dwarven blacksmith with a germ phobia,
Oh. Oh.
or a severed talking head, they all offer their own version of help along the way and shape Kratos' perspective of things that help strengthen the bond between him and his son, much to the chagrin of Kratos himself, who prefers to have as few people in his life as possible.
Boy, the longer you wait to tell him his true nature, the more damage you do. He will resent you, and you may lose him forever.
There is much about me I would not have him know.
So you value your privacy more than your son, eh?
I'm going to cut off your head now.
The fact you will see your son grow and get molded through his journey is a pleasant development. He will go through various phases, some of which rebellious, and this not only reflects on the story, but in combat as well. If he's angry, he will not listen to commands and he will do whatever he pleases, and if he's sad, he won't do much of anything. While you may not work your way through as many enemies as you remember doing in previous God of War games, the combat in this title is by far the best in the series yet, despite seeing your two blades replaced with a single axe. Attacks feel heavy and impactful, and the ability to throw your axe at a distant enemy and then focus on the one in front of you with your bare hands allows for interesting dynamic. As you unlock more skills and upgrade your equipment, combat continues to grow and expand, making it a challenging but fun experience. If you seek to truly test your strength, the game has optional Valkyrie bosses for you to tackle, with its final boss being one of the trickiest bosses in recent history. If you thought God of War titles prior to this one were alright, and you haven't played this yet, you are in for a treat. This is not God of War as you remember it, this is God of War as it should be.
What is this?
Number 2. The Witness. Wait, you mean that puzzle game? Yep, that puzzle game. This will come out of left field for most, I'm sure, but it's a game that I simply cannot overlook as it has impacted me so fiercely. This game taught me a language. It taught me to speak the language of the game, which helped me solve the many puzzles it has to offer. What's more than that, it did so without a single word. Aside from minimal ambient sounds, which was a good call, as this game requires a lot of thinking, there's nothing in this game. No music, no dialogue, nothing, save for some optional philosophical blurbs that have nothing to do with the game. At the start, you are barred by a gate with a single panel on it. This panel cleverly teaches you the most basic mechanic of the game, and from there you are shown the ropes at a steady pace and in such a way that it just makes sense. If I stumbled across a puzzle that had weird icons in it that I didn't understand, I knew that somewhere out there was a place where I would learn what they meant. When I ultimately learned what said symbols meant, and went back to tackle the problem that I had previously given up on, I succeeded. The feeling of learning things and solving these issues all by myself gave me a sense of euphoria that I simply cannot express in words. Some of these puzzles kept me busy even when I was not behind my screen, having me sit somewhere with pad and pen, trying to figure out the route that I had to take in a particular puzzle. No other game has ever done that for me before. The game takes place in a 3D environment, but all the puzzles are solved on a 2D panel. However, many puzzles require you to look closely at the environment to help you solve the puzzles. It is an incredibly clever mix of 2D and 3D. While the puzzles are solved on a 2D plane, there are puzzles cleverly hidden within the world itself, which you can only see if you stand just right. Some of those melt my mind, and I can understand how it took 7 years to make this game. To me, this is the best puzzle game ever made. And finally, my overall game of the decade. Number 1, Mass Effect 2. I'm going to cheat on this a little bit. Ideally, I want to just state Mass Effect as a whole. Yes, the game comes in 3 parts, but they are so tightly linked together, it almost feels wrong to just pick one game. But rules are rules, and I will pick Mass Effect 2 as the best title in the series. But I will judge the game, or should I say, the game experience, as a whole. And as far as game experiences go, I will say that Mass Effect is the best one I have ever had. No contest. To those that are, as of yet, unfamiliar with this title, you play as either a male or female version of the by now legendary Commander Shepard.
Shepard.
Grunt.
Shepard.
Rex.
Commander Shepard. Shepard, Shepard, Shepard.
Rex. Grunt.
Shepard. Shepard. Shepard.
And you travel through the galaxy solving problems and uniting species against a seemingly immortal and all-powerful enemy that intends to execute an intergalactic extinction event. While the story itself is interesting in its own right, the real star of this trilogy is the crew that you build throughout this journey. You pick up specialists and fellow soldiers alike, and during downtime in between missions you can chat them up to learn more about who they are and what drives them.
Have you got a minute?
Can it wait for a bit? I'm in the middle of some calibrations.
Before long, your crew will feel more akin to family, making inevitable tragic events all the more heartbreaking.
Mordin, no! Shepard, please. Need to do this. My project, my work, my cure. My responsibility.
I'm sorry.
I'm not. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong.
One of the major selling points of the game is its Paragon Renegade system, or the good cop bad cop system, if you will. Through the game's many conversations, you are able to shape people's view of you, Commander Shepard. And once you are enough of a do-goody two-shoes or enough of an asshole, additional dialogue options open up that will help you out where otherwise potential bad stuff would happen to you or your team members. And trust me when I say that seeing bad things happen to your teammates is among the worst feelings you will ever experience.
Talizora, you are hereby found guilty of treason against the Quarian people and sentenced to exile.
As Commander Shepard, you aim to stop the Reapers, the aforementioned godlike enemy, and in order to do that you need help from a lot of people and a lot of places. And to do that, you first need to scratch their backs before they will scratch yours. As such, you perform a lot of tasks, most of which go down in history as a "this was possible because of Commander Shepard" sort of way. Before long, people will speak highly of your accomplishments, and as a player you cannot help but feel proud of the many seemingly impossible things you helped establish and or solve. It strokes your ego in a way few games manage to do. Combat is mostly a cover-based shooter, but there is an option to be more experimental and creative with additional abilities, making you more of a tanky melee fighter or a biotic god, this game's version of a magic user. You rarely venture out alone, often taking 1 or 2 squad members with you. Every member of your crew has an affinity for a particular style of combat, so it's wise to pick your allies based on your style of playing to get the most efficiency out of your encounters. You might have heard stories or rumors about the ending of the 3rd game, how it's terrible and ruins the entire game. Sure, it's not the best ending, but I do think that there is a bit of an overreaction towards it. At that, the ending, which is roughly 1% of the overall experience, doesn't make the other 99% of the game, which is absolutely stellar, somehow void. This incredible against all odds story takes place over the course of 3 games. The first one introducing you, the commander, and the hint of a dangerous enemy. The second game focuses more on individual problems and building a bond with your crew. And ultimately, game number 3 makes you go on the offensive, rallying the known galaxy under your banner to square off against the enemy. This series is absolutely astonishing, offering not only a great main story, but some incredible DLC as well. In particular, the Citadel DLC of the third game is a well-deserved piece of fan service, where the trilogy as we know it gets sent off with the fanfare and firework it definitely deserves. Despite the many bugs that plague these games, and there are quite a few indeed, and despite the facial animations sometimes ruining certain scenes, this game, or should I say game series, is, without a shadow of a doubt, my absolute number 1. And that concludes the list. So, quick recap. Number 10, Portal 2. Number 9, Hollow Knight. Number 8, Life is Strange. Number 7, Divinity Original Sin 2. Number 6, The Witcher 3. Number 5, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Number 4, The Last of Us. Number 3, God of War. Number 2, The Witness. And not so much one game, but rather the sci-fi trilogy that is Mass Effect, sits at my number 1 as my absolute experience of the decade, 2010 to 2019. And that, as they say, is a wrap. Do you agree with this list? Do you have something to say? I'm sure that you do. Or do you perhaps wish to share your own top 10 of the decade? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Thanks a lot for watching. I am the Hiraeth Gamer, and I will see you on the next one. Oh, hey, quickly, before you go, be a pal and do this, and this for me. It would really help me out. Thanks.